am so happy, so honored to have the incredible Victor Goines on the Everything Saxophone podcast. Welcome, Victor.
Hi, Donna. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and included in all of these saxophone players who've been on your show.
Oh, well, you're one of the best. I mean, I was saying to you before we officially started, I can't believe it. I've been watching him on TV with the jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra for the longest time, since the 90s, since you guys started. And here you are on the podcast. I mean, so yeah, fangirl right here for sure. But I'm so happy to have you on here. Now, Victor has been a part of JLCO for a really long time, since 1993, but he's also been part of other things as well. I had this opportunity to interview him because one of his, I guess, publicists and stuff sent me a CD of the Woodlawn Suite. We're going to be talking about this today for sure. This is incredible. The music, but also the roster of musicians is just insane on this. So we're definitely going to hit up that. But what I'd love to do for those people that may not know of you, and that's okay, they're going to know you now. Let's go back to the very beginning. So when did you get started in music? And saxophone or clarinet may not have been your first instrument.
Okay, well, the show is not that long, so I'm going to try to give you the cliff notes, okay?
Okay. Awesome.
So, as a kid, I was severely asthmatic. So music is not like I had siblings or anything, and I said, oh, my brother plays music, my sister plays, so I want to be a musician. It wasn't so much that. My brother did get a trumpet for Christmas, and I ended up getting a clarinet as my first instrument. But my mother's main motivation for doing that is because as a kid with asthma, she wanted to try to find some kind of way to help me deal with my respiratory situations, how to deal with that. And so music was the way of going through it, and it ended up being the perfect solution for a kid with my situation. And I always tell people at the end of that story is the moral is that mother knows best. And my mother and I are very, very close to this day. She's still with me at the age of 90. So and she still gives me some of the things I don't want to have other people tell me, but that's a good thing about a mother.
That's awesome. And I'm so glad you shared that story. I also play trumpet as well, and I've been teaching for a long time. I've had a lot of students that have had asthma, and playing an instrument is one of the best things that you can do because you learn how to use your lungs properly.
Truly therapeutic, I have to say,
Yeah, and many, many benefits from that for sure. So, all right, so you did start on clarinet. How long, did you play the clarinet? Did you have lessons, or was it just in school?
Yeah. Well, I went to a Catholic school as a child. So in the parochial schools, they usually have band directors that would go around in the archdiocese, they would say, and give like a 1 hour class to the kids per week, maybe 2 times a week. And I did that at the beginning of my career. All through elementary school. I was lucky I had some really good teachers, which ultimately drove me to education, something we may talk about down the line. But I found that because of those great teachers, it influenced me to want to give back. And so by the time I was in 6th or 7th grade, I was lucky enough to be one of the better students, not only in my elementary school, but in other situations around the city, and being able to perform in honor bands with a lot of great young kids who were playing, and 2 of them happened to be those guys with the last name Marsalis in it. So it was the beginning of a long relationship. Even though Wynton and I did go to kindergarten together, that didn't hurt. But we do have that whole elementary school experience that took us all the way through high school, and ultimately to still being friends and colleagues to date.
Okay, I gotta ask this. You both went to kindergarten together. Did you both remember that, like years later and stuff?
Well, I have to be honest, we didn't quite remember. Now, we remember the kindergarten very well. We went to a place called Martinez. Miss Martinez was the headmaster of that place. And Wynton always said, yeah, man, we ate red beans every day. We ate a lot of red beans too. But what reminded me of it is at one point about 40 years later, there was an article that came out in one of our local papers called the Clarion Herald, and it listed all of the graduates from Martinez kindergarten, because it was a pretty elite kindergarten. And not only did my parents make a tremendous sacrifice for me to go there, but my siblings too, because it was quite expensive. And I think I'm the only one of all my siblings who went to Martinez. I don't know why, what made me so special in that regard. I'm gonna have to ask my mom that question. But it was a very elite place. So when that article came out, it was reminded that we went to kindergarten together. And some other people who went to kindergarten there with me, I have known since that time. So it's interesting how the 6 degrees of separation are actually 1 degree.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. All right, well, let's get into like when did you know that playing clarinet, playing saxophone, when did you know that music was going to be your passion?
Great question. There were really only two things I wanted to do when I was younger. I mean, I played sports. I played every sport, and I was at least average in all of them. But I was really good as a baseball player. I could have played baseball at the next levels, but I was also starting to excel in music, and it was fun, and I was having a good time with it. I was certainly getting having some success in terms of being able to participate with kids around the state. So it just became the direction I was going to go. Again, I went to a junior high school by the name of Andrew J. Bell Junior High. I had a band director at that time named Mr. Donald Richardson, and he was a phenomenal teacher. I think I learned more in 1 year at that school than I learned the 4 or 5 years as an elementary school kid. And then from there, I went to an all-boys Catholic school in New Orleans named St. Augustine High School. And I learned a tremendous amount there because my band director there was Mr. Edwin Harrell Hampton. And my woodwind teacher was Mr. Carl Bluen. And we had a brass teacher by the name of Mr. Lawrence Winchester as well. And all of them were really, really influential in my life. So from a music perspective, those were the things that made me realize music is what I wanted to do at an early age. Now I have to tell you, at one point it was exclusively, not exclusively, but predominantly, let me say, I thought because of the same kind of stereotypes that deal with instruments, that I thought I would probably go into classical music. I was really practicing, Mozart, all the different clarinet concertos of the clarinet repertoire and all of that. And I thought I would go into classical music, but I happened to be hanging out with Wynton and Branford at their home, and he played a recording of John Coltrane playing Giant Steps, and that was the switch that turned me in my pursuit of jazz. I still loved studying classical music. I still played, but then it required me to expand I've always been interested in other instruments. But at that point, I really began to become interested in the saxophone as well. So my father bought me a tenor saxophone. My mother bought my clarinet, and they were together, but they made their own sacrifices in terms of the monetary things that might have been their discretionary funds. My mother, made the sacrifice to buy my clarinet. My father made the sacrifice to buy my saxophone. And at that point, I was moving forward in terms of becoming a musician of a serious nature to try to become a professional. I went to Loyola University in New Orleans for my undergraduate degree. But during that time, I began to study with someone I knew already, which was Ellis Marsalis.
Okay.
And I actually have to back up one step and go back to high school. I mentioned the name Carl Bluen. He was my clarinet teacher in high school, but he was also my mathematics teacher in high school, and someone who was influential from that date to the present. We're still very good friends now, but I always look at him as a teacher. When I need sources of reference, I always get back and have dialogues with him. And I think I tell that story because I want kids to realize that you have to make the relationship that you want to have with a person, and realize those early relationships can be those that last through your entire life. Your teacher is a very important person. So if you can develop that good relationship with them, you can always go back to them and nurture something much greater than just 1 hour lessons a week.
I want to expand upon that. That's so true. When I this was college for me. I went to Queens College, and some of my friends said, you got to study with Vincent Penzarella because he's the guy. Yeah, you've heard of him. And yeah, he changed my life. He changed my life in terms of the way I thought about music. I'm not just saying trumpet, music, because his thing, you study the opera singers. If you want a beautiful sound, you study the opera singers. The early opera singers and stuff like that. Totally changed the way I thought about things.
And Vince is very special because he said music. He didn't say classical. He didn't say jazz. He said music. He may have used opera as his means of communicating, but my experience with Vince, because I've used him to help some of my students with their amateur when I taught at Juilliard, is about learning how to play the instrument, and then you can play any music you want.
Yeah, that's totally it. I remember standing outside his apartment, waiting in the hallway. He had another student, and or he was finishing up, or he was in between, and he was just like playing. It sounded like the angel Gabriel playing. I swear to you, just it was so incredible. And then you're saying to yourself, "Okay, now I got to walk in there now."
Right.
But I mean, he was definitely incredibly influential. I'd have had other teachers as well, for sure, but there's some that, for all of us, that stick out. They resonate, no pun intended, they resonate with us. So who do you think then, you had Ellis Marsalis. Were there any other teachers that stuck out, that were inspirational, that helped you, not even just playing wise, music wise, but even we could say teaching wise as well?
Well, yeah, I always say the city of New Orleans, it wasn't a bad place to be from.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I was fortunate to be taught by all of the musicians who were there, whether it was Ellis Marsalis, whether it was Carl Blue, and there was a vocalist named Miss Jermaine Basil, who is our first lady of song. She's still with us. And I would go by their gigs and sit in. There was Fred Kemp, a great tenor player who played with Fats Domino. Smokey Johnson, who was a friend of my uncle's, who played down at the Mesa on Bourbon. I mean, I was just lucky to be able to go to all the clubs. They embraced me. They tolerated me. I have to say, as a young kid, you go there and you can't really play. So, musicians have to be tolerable of young musicians coming up to play and be encouraging of them so that they can actually move through those periods of time when they don't play as well as they hope to play. So the city of New Orleans was a great teacher for me and all of the musicians who were part of it, I always said that being from New Orleans, we had an unfair advantage as musicians with all of that music around the city.
You did. There's no question about that. All the people that I've spoken to from New Orleans, and like Jason Mingledorff is another person who's he's there right now. He didn't grow up there, but just even the different styles of music. It's so, to me, it's so unique. It's so rhythmic and it's so soulful at the same time. It's different.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with Kenny Washington, the drummer, just yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that as a kid, he used to go check out Wynton Kelly and all of them, and really, Philly Joe Jones. He would go down and check out their trios and all that kind of stuff. Like, wow, man, I wish I could have checked them out. We both know Jimmy Cobb. So, but just the fact that I was around musicians of that caliber who represented that kind of excellence in the genre of music that I was interested in was a tremendous teaching tool for me.
Let me ask you something, and this is leading into, this is leading from what you're just saying. Okay, so when we were growing up, we're close to the same age for the most part. But you had to go to clubs to check people out. Yeah, you got albums, all that kind of thing, whatever, eventually CDs. But now everybody's access to YouTube and stuff. How do you feel about that? Sometimes YouTube can be too much information or whatever. Sometimes YouTube is awesome because you could really learn about somebody that's in another country you never would have heard of, whatever. But comparing now with what we were growing up with, I don't want to say we were limited. I don't want to say that, just different times. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think people utilize the information that's available to them in the time that they're on this planet. And if Miles or Coleman Hawkins or Lester Young would have had technology available to them, I think they would have utilized it as well. Now, the question becomes, how do we use it? Do we use it in a way that helps us to be better musicians, better people? I think that's the important part. Or do we use it to, well, let me say it in a positive sense. We don't want to use it only so that it helps us get past the obstacles without really learning something from them. And I think it's important that we learn something in every case. So a smartphone, for instance, is a great device as long as you use it to learn something and not let it be something you use as a crutch to access only when you need it, because you really need to be acquiring information that you can store inside of yourself, inside of your mind, inside of your memory bank, so that when the time to use it is accessible. But if you don't retain that information, then you're dependent upon that cell phone to get back out there. So you talked about YouTube, they talk about TikTok, they talk about Instagram, or Instagram is not really one of those, but TikTok, YouTube, I'll say. People use that as a place to play now. I remember asking one of my students about another musician they had. He sent me a demonstration of him playing. He was a guy who played the EVI, the electronic, that's the trumpet version of the electronic wind instrument. And the
Okay.
guy could play. Oh, he could really play it. He was playing it well. I said, man, where can I hear him play? They say on YouTube. I said, YouTube is not a place. They say, yes, it is. That's where people live at. Well, I prefer to live in a club where I'm looking eye to eye, face to face. I can feel the vibration of the music. I can feel the wind, because music is the change of the air around us. You know, you want to hear all of that kind of stuff. You want to feel it, actually.
Wow. That I'm going to say this, that's profound. I didn't even think of that. And I didn't even think of it didn't even occur to me that people would consider YouTube a place, or TikTok. I'm not so much on TikTok. I don't know. I'm just not on that as much. YouTube, I could totally appreciate, but that's really interesting.
Now, I think YouTube does have a certain value. You know, I mean, as a kid, there was a VHS. Well, there was a video called "The Coltrane Legacy." It was on VHS tape. I wore that tape out about 4 or 5 different times. I had to keep rebuying the video. So that's no different than it being on YouTube. So you know, accessibility is great, and that's a good thing. You know, you have to do is hit a button, but then you still have to figure out how you're going to utilize that information, and just not use it for something as background purposes.
Yeah, and you know what? Let me also go back into something you just said that kind of struck me. You said you prefer to be in clubs where you can look eye to eye to people, where you can feel the air in between. You could feel the energy. You know, you can. It's easier to. There's such a difference I feel between, like playing for a screen, like what we're
Mhm,
looking at now, and then playing for people.
mhm.
And do you think that, the kids that are coming up into college today, that they may be missing that, and that may be affecting how they're approaching the music or performing and stuff?
Well, it could be because, you know, when you play into a camera, I mean, you have to generate all the energy yourself.
Yeah.
Club, you know, I remember when I first joined the Wynton Marsalis Septet, and we played the Vanguard. Man, the Vanguard was so vibrant. Oh my goodness. You know, people were in there cheering and clapping, and it
Yeah.
was like being in a nice community and situation. It was extraordinary. So, but when you play it into a camera, it's all dependent upon you, and then you can do extra takes of it, or you can do something like that. But when you're playing live, there's a call and response happening, not just on the bandstand, but between the audience and the bandstand. So you play something, the audience say, yeah, and then you play something because that response made you do it again. Or they might say, play that again, and then they play it right again. Or, you know, in our world, we'll say, what you say? Then the person plays it again. That's kind of like they respond to it again. They say, oh, you meant to say that. So you don't get that on the camera. You know, and even if you have it in a virtual situation where, let's say, the band is virtual and the audience is sitting there listening to it live, most times you can't hear what the audience is saying.
Yeah, yeah.
They might be in a live situation on a broadcast or something like that, but you can't really hear. But when you're in a club or you in a great hall, yeah, I remember in the early or in the late '80s, I think it was, Wynton and the Jazz on Lincoln Center Orchestra would always play live from Lincoln Center.
Yeah,
It was for a live house. Now it was broadcasting on PBS.
that's right.
And that was the best I could be to being in the club for that situation. But the audience was part of the energy that gave the band some inspiration to play. The band always has its own inspiration, but the audience, we practice to play for audiences. I've always practiced to be able to play for audiences. You know, otherwise, playing in the closet by myself is not really the most interesting thing in the world to me. Maybe to someone, but not to me.
No, that's true. But this is such an important point, and I'm still struck by, that wasn't expecting to go down this path for this conversation, but how people growing up today think of a virtual space, and especially with going through COVID, right? But a virtual space being a space to play. And like, there's, for example, Stage It, right? Stage has been around for a long time, even before COVID. Stage It is a place where a lot of musicians, like a lot of more pop indie, like Ani DeFranco has been on Stage It for a long time, but a lot of jazz musicians explored that during COVID and stuff, and that was their place. And while you had the interactivity of a chat role going through that and stuff like that, I tend to think it's still not the same, because like you said, you've got to generate that energy, and sometimes that's hard to do.
Well, it seemed like Stage It, I don't know that platform Stage It, was great because it seemed like it was utilized initially as a form of advertisement, but not as a form of where I'm going to be at to really continue to create the music, but also in other popular forms of music, the level of improvisation involved is not as high as in jazz.
Yeah.
And I think not as high because it's not that they're not improvising. There's some things happening in there, but maybe not as at the level of which jazz musicians are improvising. And I'm not qualifying for those listening. I'm not qualifying jazz or any other type of music.
Sure.
But as someone who's played other types of music, there are different levels or different quantities of improvisation that's taking place in different types of music,
Oh, absolutely. There's different styles, different audience interests too, for sure. There's no question about that. But it's just so interesting, this whole like space conversation. But I'm going to go back now for a second. And what I'm really curious about with your early teachers and stuff, thinking about like tips for our listeners, right? But what was like one of the most influential, I'll do it this way, one of the most influential, whether it's exercises or even just advice that you received that just really helped you?
Wow, we don't have enough time on this show for all of those. So I'll try to give you some of the highlights. Well, in junior high, we used to have a situation, and every musician has probably dealt with this, where your band director would say, we're going to have a challenge. Like I played the first chair clarinet in my middle school band. And there was another great clarinet player in the band named Mary Smith. Oh, Mary could play. She could really play. And so Mr. Richardson, our band director, we utilized that as a means to motivate. And almost every other day, we would challenge each other. If I had the first chair, Mary would come a couple of days. I want a challenge for that first chair. Mr. Rich would do it in front of everybody. And then I don't know who won on any given day, but unfortunately, we weren't the judges. So Mr. Rich's words are the one that counted. And he said, Mary, you take the first chair. Victor, you get up and sit in that second chair. That was kind of humiliating. I'm like, wow, man, okay, get up and sit in the second chair. So, okay, I'm going to challenge her in 2-3 days. Then 2-3 days will come later. I say, I want a challenge for my chair back. So we challenge until he might say, well, Mary, you have to get in that second chair. Now Victor's back over here. He used it all the time. So that was one of the motivating things because I wanted to be in that first chair. That meant something to me. In high school, it was a similar thing because when I went to my high school, the reputation of it was very, very high about the musicians who were there. So I remember a friend of mine said, man, if you don't make the band in the position you go into, then you don't get a chance to re-audition. So now I wanted to play first clarinet, but I said, well, I'm auditioning for second clarinet just to make sure I get in the band. But then when I got there and I heard the other clarinet players, I was like, I could play better than them. I'm going to try to re-audition. So I went to my clarinet teacher, Mr. Blue, and I said, Mr. Blue, I want to re-audition for He said, you need to stay where you're at. I'm like, okay, that's all right. That was for the marching band, but I knew concert season was coming up. And when we got to concert band, I said, I'm going to audition for that first chair. So when we got to concert band, I auditioned and I got the first chair. And I stayed in that first chair for all 3 years of high school over seniors, juniors, and peers of mine who were in school with me. And another thing that happened to me in high school that I'll never forget is our head band director, Mr. Hampton. He was a clarinet and saxophone player too. We used to play clarinet duets together. So one time I was playing a clarinet duet with him on my lunch break. And he didn't feel like I was really completely involved in the activity. Maybe I was not playing. I wasn't as serious about it as he wanted me to be. So after playing about 5 minutes, he said, hey man, let's put the instruments up. I said, well, why is that? He said, because you're not serious. You're not invested. He said, when you decide to play, be in there to play. If you don't want to play, don't play. So he got up, packed up his horn. I was sitting there with my clarinet like, wow. Just left me sitting here with my clarinet. So from that point on, I decided when I was going to play, I was going to be invested in playing. And that has always been my mantra moving forward. If you're in it, be in the moment, truly be into it. And if you don't want to play, don't play. Go do something else and have a good time doing that.
That's incredible advice. And, and if I could expand upon that too, you could be invested in playing. It doesn't mean that, for a lot of people, they're playing, especially after COVID, said, I've got to play an instrument because that's what I've always wanted to do. And they may be invested in playing for themselves. And that's okay too. It's just not, being distracted by the phone and all these types of things, just being in the moment, I guess.
Well, the great Rufus Reid, bassist. I had him in a workshop at Northwestern one time. He's a graduate of Northwestern. And he told my students, he said, when I listen to some music, that's an event for me. He said, when I get ready to listen, I have a music listening room. I go into that room, I cut everything off except that record, and I listen to that record. I give it my undivided attention. I don't study with the music on. I don't cook food with the music on. He said, when I listen, I'm only listening, and that's a tremendous thing that everybody should strive to do, because then you're giving it your 110% attention. And therefore you're going to get that return out of it. But if you listen 30% of the energy of what you're dealing with, you're going to get a 30% return. So, you have to be invested in terms of anything that you do, even listening to music. I tend not to like music that's in the background on really, really soft where you can barely hear it.
Yeah,
I'm usually like, turn it off or turn it up. I want to hear it or I don't want to hear it at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I taught in public schools for a while, and I remember in elementary, and they wouldn't allow us to have lessons with the kids when testing was going on. And it annoyed me because I'm trying to, teach them whatever. But, the thing is, a lot of kids are brought up now today where they're listening to music in the background when they're taking tests. I can't do that because I'm trying to analyze the music instead of doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
In fact, that's pretty inequitable, because if you're not a musician, it might fly over your head because you're not really listening to it. You might only be hearing it. But if you're a musician and you're doing one skill over here and you listening to that music, then you're divided, if you're really into the music. But it's unfortunate that's the technique for some. I mean, it may be soothing for some, but for a musician who's really attentive to the things that's happening around them, it could be very distracting.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you this question. All right, so this is awesome. Like, what Rufus Reid said and all that kind of thing. Listening is an event. That's really cool. Do you have tips to help people to listen more intently?
I don't necessarily have tips that I've developed or anything like that. But what I do believe is that the repetitive aspect of listening to something provides us an opportunity to hear new things each time. And when you're listening, there's certain events you're going to hear that you anticipate that might have caught your attention, that are appealing to you. But every time you listen, it is really for the serious musician. Every time you hear something, you should try to find something new that you're hearing in the music. And even as a player, when we play things, different songs or compositions on the bandstand, every time we play, I try to make sure I hear something that I didn't hear the first time. I'm really listening with that kind of detail. As an improviser, when I'm playing with people, I try to listen to what they're doing as a soloist, because if I'm tuned into what they're doing, it might give me some extraordinary inspiration that will make me come up with something much more profound than what I had already planned to play on my solo when I got there. Because there are a lot of musicians, young and old, who will get up there, and when rhythm changes up playing, they know exactly what they're going to play before the downbeat happens. But what if somewhere along the line, the drummer drops a beat and something is not what you thought it was going to be? Then what you had planned to play might not work as well as what you may find to play. So, it's important that we listen with that kind of detail, because the music tells you. And that's a quote I took from a video Vincent Marsalis did some years ago. In the video was, the music tells you. So for me, I would say the music tells you what you should play. The question is, are you listening enough to hear what it's telling you? It's like a person talking to you and they're telling you something. And some people hear people, but they're not listening to them. Or if you want to switch around, they're listening, but they're not hearing. It doesn't matter which way you get it. But the point is, there's a detailed aspect to listening. You can only get the maximum out of that something if you really are very attentive to what's happening and in the moment of what's happening. And that's really important for all of us, because once that moment passes, it never comes back. It's a very, very specific point in time. So, you can pick your event. And even if somebody plays the same thing, it's not the same, because different things happen in the universe that gives it a different type of sonic perspective, or rhythmic or harmonic. You're not going to play the same lick over some altered chords or some different sets of chords, and it sounds differently based upon the harmonic progression that's there, or even to where my rhythmic phrasing is going to be different every time, because I'm not a machine, I'm not AI. So the way I'm going to play it is going to change a little bit based upon how I feel on that given day.
Wow. This is like a masterclass in listening, but you know what? It's also a masterclass in communication, because when you're talking about this right now, one of the biggest, well, no, it's not just for this time period. This has always been a case with humans in history. Some of the biggest conflicts arose because people don't communicate, because they don't know how to listen to others. And they're in their mind, they got all this stuff going, pre-planning what they're going to say. Just like you said, some people, if the rhythms changes, oh, I'm going to do this. And, stuff happens. And that messes that up. This is so interesting. Just the analogies to communication and having conversations. Like improvisation is a conversation, and you never really had the same exact conversation twice.
I had an interesting thing happen recently. I was at an event at Jazz St. Louis, where I'm at now, and we had a little bit of a jam session, and they had some young saxophonists come sit in. So we were playing rhythm changes. I was talking to them about listening. In not just in terms of the moment at this point, but having listened to music that are important inside of the history of jazz, whether it's Body and Soul by Coleman Hawkins, or Don Byers playing I Got Rhythm, or in this case, Oleo by Miles Davis from the recording Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet. And so when I had a chance to play, I specifically played John Coltrane's solo on Oleo that he performed with Miles. And so because I wanted to see what would happen, how they would react. So when I finished playing, I came to the side, and one of the young men say, "Did you play John Coltrane solo?" I said, "Yeah, I wanted to see if you were paying attention or if you even knew the solo." He said, "I know the solo." And I was listening. I said, "Okay, mission accomplished." I wanted to see if you were listening. And he was listening. So I was happy to hear that. That's
cool. And you know what? That's going to go into my next question, because there's a couple of parts to this. I want to know, like, you met with Wynton in Brantford, and you heard that John Coltrane Giant Steps recording, and that like flipped the switch for you. How did you, your own jazz studies, early days, what were you doing? What were you doing? And then I want to also get into like transcription tips and whatnot.
By then I was close to getting out of high school, and there were lots of venues in New Orleans, and two that come to mind is Snug Harbor, which is one that's still there and functioning very, very well. But another one was Tyler's Beer Garden, which was in the uptown area of New Orleans on a magazine near Jefferson, for those who might know New Orleans. And let's say during this time, I was in college. I was at Loyola. And I remember Wynton was playing with Herbie Hancock. That's when the VSOP was out there, the quartet. And he was also playing with Art Blakey. And on this one occasion, he came home from, his whole New York experience, and I started talking to him. I said, "Hey, man, what do I have to do to get my stuff together?" He said, "Man, take some lessons with my dad." So I started studying with Ellis Marsalis. Even though I knew Mr. Marsalis, I hadn't really taken lessons with him. So this was another level. So as a result of studying with him, I started going to the club, Tyler's, where he would play at on Wednesday nights. And I remember I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have a car. Tyler's was located in a less than desirable neighborhood in New Orleans. So many times if I went there after school, Loyola was located uptown as well. So I can get from Loyola to Tyler's if I was willing to stay late enough at night. So I would go to school at 8 o'clock in the morning. My last class was at 5, but Tyler's didn't start until 8. So if I was going to stay, I had to have those 3 hours. I stayed uptown. And then if the gig was ending at 12, I didn't know how I was going to get home. But I didn't worry about that. I said, I'm going to figure that out. Wow. And so I would go to Tyler's Beer Garden, and ultimately Mr. Marsalis started letting me sit in with him after a while. Initially I would go just to listen, but then he started giving me opportunity to sit in with him and whatnot. And it was the beginning of how I started to become more interactive on the bandstand. And even when he asked me to be in his band at that time, I remember, like every other young person, I didn't know a lot of repertoire. So he would start playing songs. I would bring my real book to the gig, and he would just play and then fall into this song that we were playing. There's another great bass player from New Orleans named George French, and George would be on those gigs a lot of time. So while he was going through these things, George would tell me what song we were about to play. He said, he's playing this melody here. And so I'd be turning the pages, trying to get to that song to get ready to play it. And then once we start the song, Mr. Marsalis would play something different. George said, oh, no, he's not playing that tune. He's playing another tune. You got to turn the page. And I would turn the page. But, I'd be like, man, this is not working. This is a problem because I don't know the music. So I started bringing a pad of paper on the bandstand with me. And when he would play tunes, I would write it down. And by the end of the night, I had a whole repertoire of things we played on the gig. So I would go home and learn all those songs. I'd come back the next time. Oh, I'll be ready. Then he'd play a whole nother list, a whole nother new list. I was like, wow, okay. Well, I guess I'm going to learn a lot of songs. And I did. I learned a lot of songs from him. And through our relationship evolving, I got comfortable enough. If it was something I didn't know while we were on the gig, I'd say, hey, can you play that melody behind the solo so I could kind of hear it a little bit and play it? And on the side, I'm kind of playing real soft, learning the melody. And those were other ways that I got to learn more repertoire while I was playing with Ellis Marsalis.
Wow, that's really cool. Okay, with the repertoire with that, let me ask you this question then. You wrote down, oh, he did this tune, you wrote it down, you went home. How did you, if you could remember, how did you learn the tunes? What did you do? You learned the melody by ear, you tried to figure out the harmony by ear, how did you approach improvisation over it?
Well, then I got the records because I would find records of people playing or recordings of people playing those songs. If it was rhythm and ning, I'd look up Thelonious Monk at the It Club. If it was All the Things You Are, I look up Johnny Griffin live in Tokyo. And all of those kind of things. If I were a bell, I look up Miles Davis playing it. So Bye Bye Blackbird, John Coltrane, and I would learn those and learn their solos, and those would become the ways that I would become more familiar with the music that would be performed in live situations.
That's cool. This is these stories, and there's lessons behind these stories. That's what's so awesome. So now let me go further ahead. When did you start working with Wynton in Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra? How did that come about?
It came about at a recommendation of great saxophone player Wes Anderson. And I had always wanted to be in Wynton's band. It was never, do I want to be in it? I was like, when can I possibly get a chance to be in it? So in 1993, Wynton wrote a piece called Six Syncopated Movements. It was a commission work by the New York State Theater and Peter Martins, who was the director of the New York City Ballet. And Wynton wrote this baritone saxophone part that also had bass clarinet on it. And the story goes that the bass clarinet part was so difficult. Many of the saxophone players who played clarinet, but it was just a virtuosic level of clarinet that needed to be played. But on the bass clarinet, most people just didn't play that much clarinet or that much bass clarinet.
Oh, okay.
Especially at that time. There's a lot of great technicians on the clarinet now. But anyway, they tried various people who couldn't play it. So Wynton called me one time and he said, hey man, I got this bass clarinet part that, do you play? He knew I played Barry. He knew I had a Barry. So he said, do you play bass clarinet? I said, yeah, man, I play bass clarinet. He said, no, man, do you really play bass clarinet? I said, yeah, man, I play bass clarinet. He said, well, look, I got this music I want to sing you. If you do this gig. I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. Great. So we got off the phone and his dad had just acquired a new Yamaha bass clarinet. And I called his dad. I said, can I borrow your bass clarinet? I had never played bass clarinet before. So the moral of that story is lie whenever you need to. I wanted that gig.
That's awesome.
So I borrowed the bass clarinet and I practiced it. I went up there and played the part, but the music was phenomenal. It was. I think the music surpassed with all due respect, the dance, without doubt. And it was just to be around that level of musicianship across the band and the camaraderie they had a certain humility to it, but a certain arrogance to it because we knew it was great. And I was like, man, this is what I gotta be doing. So I got to play that in 1993, in like March of 1993. And then in October of 1993, I got a call from Wynton on a Saturday afternoon. He said, hey man, I need you to come out on the road with me with my septet, playing tenor. I said, oh yeah, McGray. I was like, at last, I'm finally here. I said, when you need me to come? He said, Monday. I said, I got to teach class Monday morning, man. I was teaching at the University of New Orleans with his dad. I said, well, look, I got a gig with your dad tonight. Let me talk to him and get a feeler for that. He said, oh man, okay. He said, I should have asked my dad about that when I just got your number from him. I said, okay, I'm gonna talk to him. I'll call you back. He said, call me back. I need to know soon. I said, okay. So I hung up the phone. I called his dad. His dad was sleeping. His younger brother, Jason, answered the phone and told me his dad was asleep. I said, well, look, ask your dad to call me when you wake up before we go to the gig. He said, okay. And then, in the typical way, the way my mind works, I was like, man, every second I wait, there's a lot of tenor players out there. He's going to call somebody else. I said, I can't have that. I called him right back. I said, send the airline ticket. I'm coming. The first gig was in Bangor, Maine. I said, I'm coming out there. I'll be there. So when I got to the gig that night, I was with his dad, and before we went on stage, I said, hey, man, I got a call from Wynton. He said, yeah, I know he was trying to reach you. What do you want? And I said, he asked me to come out on the road with him on Monday. He said, really? I said, yeah. He said, well, what did you tell him? I said, I told him yes. He said, good. I would hate to think we practicing all this time to stay home. So I ultimately set up a situation at school where I had my colleagues helping with my classes. I was FedExing things back and forth, my assignments to my students. This was before the internet. Technology was what it was. I remember AOL was kind of just coming out and all of that kind of stuff, but it was really expensive to do that. So Wynton had asked me to come out for 2 weeks. I thought it would be 2 weeks. And then after the first 2 weeks, he said, hey, man, can you stay out 2 more weeks? I said, okay, cool. So that was like, by then we were getting toward the end of November, and he used to always play Blues Alley at that time. So we did Blues Alley. And at the end of that 2 weeks, he said, well, can you stay out 2 more weeks? I said, oh, yeah, man. Now we're going into the Village Vanguard. I was like, yeah, wow, I'm out here. Okay. So when we got to the Village Vanguard, every tenor player in the city of New York came out because they knew the gig was open and it wasn't really secured. And I remember at one point, a tenor player, I'll stay anonymous, I remember who it was, he wanted to sit in with the band. So Wynton said, okay. So the guy came up to sit in. Wynton said, man, you can sit down. He's going to play. I said, I'm not sitting down. I came to be on the road. I will get off the bandstand when you tell me, but I won't get off because I'm letting somebody else come sit in. He could stand next to me. So he came up and stood next to me. And so we played those 2 weeks. And then at the end of December, he said, man, just call the accountant and tell him, your information, he can put you on the payroll. But I hadn't really been in the band yet because there was no contracts and nothing like that. We were just doing week to week. So back at the University of New Orleans, the chairperson of the music department finally told me, he said, look, here's your options. You could take a leave of absence from the school for the spring quarter, but I need to know by March 1st of 1994 what your intent is. Either you come back and be full-time, or you decide that you're going to leave the university. I said, okay, I can do that. So I actually know where I was at on March 1st of 1994. I was in Seoul, Korea. And by then I had made up my mind. I said, I'm going to stay out on the road as long as I can. If I'm going to get off the road, it's going to be because he told me he's not going to have me out here, or he's going to fire me. And really, I said, if he doesn't fire me before March 1st, I'm not going to teach anymore. So, and again, technology wasn't when you just send an email and bam, the person gets in a second. So when I left to go on the road, I printed up 2 letters. One said to the University of New Orleans, it said, thank you for the opportunity to come out and play with Vincent Marsalis. I will be returning to my position as saxophone teacher in the fall of 1994. And the other one said, I regret to inform you, I will not be returning to the University of New Orleans. And I literally waited until midnight of March 1st to send that letter back because I hadn't been fired yet. So I said, okay, I wasn't fired. I'm not going back to UNO. And that was the point when I really felt like I was in the band.
That's a great story. Oh my gosh.
Kind of long, but it's the truth,
No, it's awesome. It's so cool. So, and then you were with Wynton a very long time.
Well, I'm still with the band unless you know something I don't know.
Yeah. No.
So, and I'm still playing with the band. 30 years now.
That's incredible. That's just so incredible. What a great story. And here's the thing. You may have left education at that time, but you did go back to it. So as you said before, giving back, so can you tell us like when you did go back into education?
Yeah, well, the septet came off the road in 1994, but we still had a lot of things we were doing. That was also the same time when the septet used to be a part of the Jazz on Lincoln Center Orchestra. We functioned within it. So in 1994, went and recorded Blown on the Fields, and we were still doing other things along the way. In 1995, I think it was 95, I decided to take a position at Florida A&M University for a year. I did that, and then we were still working as the big band, so I got off the road for a while with that. And then in 1999, kind of fast forward a couple of years, because I didn't teach in a university for a while, I received a call from a gentleman trying to get in touch with me, and I didn't recognize the number, so I didn't take the call. I was like, I'm not taking this call. And then our education department at Jazz on Lincoln Center, Laura Johnson was our director of education. And she called me. She said, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm cool. What's up?" She said, "There's somebody trying to get in touch with you." I said, "Who?" She said, "His name is Joe Polisi." I said, "Okay." I didn't recognize the number. She said, "You might want to call him back. He's the president of the Juilliard School." I said, "Oh, okay. I'll call him back." So I called him, and at that time, the Juilliard School decided they wanted to start a jazz studies program.
Remember that? Yeah.
So we met a couple of times to talk about it, because I really had no intention of going back into education at that time. But it was the ideal situation, because Jazz at Lincoln Center, Wynton being a graduate of the Juilliard School, there was this collaboration they wanted to form as we started this program. I had this great relationship with Wynton. There was a lot of ties coming together. So I was asked to be the director of jazz studies at the Juilliard School in 1999. So I accepted the position, and we had a year to plan for the first group coming in. And the first group of students came in 2001. Unfortunately, it is also marked with 9/11. That was the first day of classes for jazz studies at the Juilliard School.
Wow.
And I ended up doing that for some 8 years, until around 2007, at which point I left. And the day I actually posted my resignation from the Juilliard School, Northwestern University called me a couple of minutes after it hit the media, and I was asked to come be the director of jazz studies there. So I took a little while off. I took a year off and kind of, researched the position and what I would be asked to do. And ultimately, I ended up going back there and taught for 14 years, until recently, when I retired from there in 2022, which kind of brings me to where I'm at now as president and CEO of Jazz St. Louis. But I'm still very much involved in education. I love to teach. I go out and do workshops. And it's been an extraordinary opportunity for me to learn, because I always say education is an exchange between multiple parties. So as much as you teach students, students can teach you as well. I learned that through my experience as a mathematics teacher.
Yeah, and that's so true. You do learn from your students. A good teacher learns from their students too, because there's differences in generational types of things. I mean, think about it now. We've spoken about like YouTube, TikTok, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm sure you've learned some things with regard to that and what's going on with that, for sure. But I'm curious about Jazz at St. Louis. Can you talk about that?
Yes, Jazz St. Louis is a not-for-profit, and our mission is that our mission is to lead our community in the uniquely advanced art form of jazz, American art form of jazz through performance, education, and community engagement. So we have some amazing artists that come in to the club from around the world and perform at our venue, but that's just a very small part of what we do. We have an extraordinary education program, and all of it is actually free of cost to the students. We have what we call Jazz Academy, which actually teaches 20 students in the St. Louis area, and they have to come in and audition, and they're usually middle school students who are in that program, and they meet 4 times a week throughout the same time period as their academic situation, usually like September through May, I would say. And we also have another branch of it called Jazz U, which is our high school students, and they come in and they meet 4 times a week as well. At the moment, that's how we have it scheduled. We have an abundance of other programs in community engagement. We have one called the Music Heals, which is, for lack of better description, it's almost like a music therapy program using jazz to actually help kids with neurological disorders to be able to communicate and interact with the music. Wow, we have so many. I'm kind of tongue tied for them right now. But we have
Yeah.
another one called the Emerson Jazz for Our Schools, where we have our artists who come in for our subscription series. What they do is on Fridays, they actually give a workshop and a concert for our students. We
Wow.
have another one called the Coffee Concert Series that, it's just a series that's actually on Thursday morning for some of our people who want to come in. We have a book club that is run by Dr. Gerald Early.
That's cool.
We have Whitaker Jazz Speaks Things, which deals with the social type of situations that are dealing with our world. I just did a program that actually featured women in jazz, and I invited 4 women that I knew in the industry to come on stage in a lecture demonstration, kind of like really like a panel discussion, I would say that one was. And then after that panel discussion, they ended up playing a concert for an hour. So we have a lot going on, and the Ocean Lifelong Learning Institute is another one. We have a collaboration with Jazz at Lincoln Center, where we do our Essentially Ellington competition here. We collaborate with them for their program called WeBop, where we're certified through them. So, and all of that for us is free of charge to the students. So you take our Jazz Academy program. Those kids come in after school. We pay for the transportation from their school, and they're with us for that day. We feed them at the end of that day. Then we pay for their transportation back home. So it's free of cost to all of our students.
Oh my gosh, this is such a great model. I'm hoping that how long has this been around?
I think it's been around for I would say about 10 years, but I'm speculating. But it's been around before my arrival.
Okay. I wonder, I don't know off the top of my head if any other communities do that much, you know? That's a great model. That's a great model.
Yeah, I think well, I won't say a lot. There's a few other organizations that may have similar programs. I think what makes us unique is that it's all free of cost. Not
Yeah.
only the programs, but then the transportation and the feeding of kids and all of that are free of cost. So that makes us very unique in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, that's awesome. And we're going to do, folks that are, listening or watching this or whatever, we'll put links in the show notes, so people can get more information on that, because I know people will be definitely interested in that. And what's interesting, and this is going to lead to the next thing, and this is how, this is how we kind of met. You mentioned like the music heals thing and the music therapy and that kind of thing, but your project, and I'm holding up the booklet, really should hold up the CD, the Woodlawn Suite. So Woodlawn is a cemetery that's in New York, and it's pretty famous. And we'll talk about that in a second. But you did something pretty extraordinary with this, where you wrote the Woodlawn Suite for this project. So would you mind talking about this? The music on this is amazing, by the way.
Absolutely. Well, the Woodlawn Suite is a piece that I wrote, and the whole idea of doing this suite was really it was put together by a young lady named Susan Olson at Woodlawn Cemetery with the assistance of her colleague Meg Ventrudo. And it's over the time, I'll have to give you a short version of this story as well, but I'll finish about the CD. I was commissioned to write a piece that celebrated some of the greats who were buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. And for most people, they'll say, well, that's a cemetery, that's a place of the dead. I said, no, it's a living history. And if you get there, you'll get to see and understand what Woodlawn is all about, the Woodlawn Conservancy. So Duke Ellington is buried there for one. Miles Davis is buried there. Eleanor Jaquette, Max Roach, Jackie McLean, Cootie Williams, Clark Terry, Lionel Hampton is buried there. So many of jazz greats are buried there. And in 2005, I happened to be working there with some of my students from Juilliard, and this young lady, Susan Olson, she came up to me and said, Victor, you should own a place in Woodlawn. And I was like 42 at the time. I said, Susan, I'm trying to live. I'm not trying to prepare for this. She said, no, don't think about it. That is real estate. You should just buy some real estate out here. So I ended up buying a plot out there. So I have a plot in Woodlawn Cemetery. And she says, I'm one of only a few jazz musicians who ever prepared to be at Woodlawn. But it's just a phenomenal place to be at. And I'm actually on the board of trustees for Woodlawn Cemetery now. So I'm really invested. but I want to keep my place unoccupied for some time.
That's good. Yes, please. Please do that. That's an awesome story.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave that vacancy there for a little while.
That's so cool. Well, in this, I'm going to say this. Um, all these tunes resonated, but the one that I can't get out of my head, it's an earworm, is Raise a Glass to Dorothy.
Oh yeah,
Da, ba-da-da-da-doo-da. It's such an awesome, I can really feel that. I can feel the essence of that tune.
yeah. Dorothy Parker, she was a fantastic person, and she had some great quotes, and I learned so much about the different people. I mean, I didn't know who Dorothy Parker was or anything, so it requires some homework. She's, part of the society, royalty in New York and all that. And she had a saying that I always say it at the gig. She said, "I like to have a martini, 2 at the most. 3, I'm under the table. 4, I'm under the host."
Yes.
So she had some great ones. So I wanted to write something that was really elegant for her. And, so in terms of society music of that time, to do something in 3 was what society dance was all about. So I decided to write a waltz.
Yes. Yes. And it's, we're going to be, playing this on the audio podcast. I'm going to start the introduction off with this. You've got to listen to this. And I'm going to put links where people can not only buy the CD, also, listen to it online for sure. That's one of my favorites. That hook, that melody hook is something you all should transcribe. I'm just saying it.
And it's performed by a fantastic young saxophone player named Sarah Hanahan. I mean, she's phenomenal, And the other great thing about the CD is that I had a great compliment when I performed the record release party at Dizzy's, and a person came up and said, "Not only is the band great, but I've never seen an as diverse band ever, because there's 50% women in the band."
That's great.
And so the great thing I think that people have to realize is that the 50% does not represent an attempt exclusively for diversity, but they can all play. At the end of the day, I got them all because they can play. I'm always about diversity and equity, but I also wanted to keep that talent level high, and I didn't have to sacrifice any of that to have these women in the band.
Yeah, I mean, just when I saw the personnel, Jamie Dauber, right? And then Sarah Hanahan, right? And then just going down here.
The Whitaker is playing lead trumpet with us. Just a whole slew of them. Jennifer, I don't have all my names before me. It's been a little while now. Jennifer Wharton's playing bass trombone. Lauren Savian's playing baritone saxophone. Alexa Tarantino played lead alto. I mean, just so many of them. It was great. We had a good time, a really good time. We were supposed to have Sarah Giacovino on the trombone. She got COVID, so she didn't get to make the record date. But she ended up making a record release party, so it was great to have her there too.
Yeah, this is a really hot band, just really good. You'll hear the quality, and the trombone playing too. Hold on, let me check the trombone. Some of those crazy trombone solos too. Oh, Wycliffe Gordon, of course, John Fedchock. Yeah, absolutely. Man, that trombone playing for a lot of those tracks, like wow, it's really good stuff.
Yeah, good repertoire, good band. The challenge with a big band, like with anything else, is economically challenged and challenging to keep them together. But we have some thoughts about another project that we might do that surrounds the Harlem Renaissance.
Oh,
So
wow.
not to give out too much information, that'll keep our listeners engaged and hopefully their eyes on the prize to see what comes out from Woodlawn and Woodlawn Conservancy surrounding the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay, so now, yeah, I'm taking notes over here, and let me ask this question: where can people keep their eyes peeled for that information? Would it be your website, or would it be the Woodlawn Conservancy?
Probably first the Woodlawn Conservancy as that comes about, because that's definitely going to happen. That centennial is coming up very soon. But also, I'll try to keep mine a little bit more current than it is right now, so people can actually be redirected back to Woodlawn to see what's going on.
Awesome. And we're not quite done yet, but tell people what your website is.
Just simply www.victorgoines.com.
Cool. Awesome. And that's one of the projects that's in the near future. What other upcoming projects do you have that you can talk about?
Well, I'm really heavy into expanding my ability to compose. I've been working on that throughout my entire musical career, and right now we're about to go on the road with Jazz at Lincoln Center doing the big band holiday show.
Mm.
So each year, members of the band are asked to do arrangements of holiday favorites. This year was my year to do another one called "Do You Hear What I Hear?"
Oh, cool.
So it's interesting to have 13 composers in a band and to hear how they all come at the music from different angles. Um, I'm also interested in string writing heavily, so I've been commissioned to write a piece for a high school in Wisconsin, Middleton High School in Wisconsin. So I'm working on that right now with a deadline coming up in 2 weeks or so. And I'm studying composition with a gentleman from New Orleans named Roger Dickerson. He's had many, many great students, including the great Terrence Blanchard.
Oh,
So, I'm still a student of the music, trying to better my skills in both composition and playing.
I love that you said that because, some people mistakenly believe that, oh, these guys are playing at a high level. They don't need to learn anymore, but it's totally the opposite.
It is. Those who are really great at what they do, they always trying to figure out how to get to the next level. The point of arrival is really not what's important. It's the journey to the destination, and the destination does not have a finite place. Many people graduate from college and say, "Oh, I'm finished learning," and I tell my students, "You're just starting now. Hopefully, you got the information necessary to tell you where to go get that information." Because I think people should go to school and get teachers to learn how to learn and what to learn.
That's gold. That's absolutely gold. And it's funny. I look back. I was just saying this yesterday, how I grew up in Long Island in New Hyde Park, and not a rich area, not at all. Solid middle class, whatever. But we had some really great teachers that taught us how to learn, that taught us how to do research, that taught us how to be curious. And all of my classmates are just doing so incredibly well. Didn't matter whether you were in advanced classes or not, didn't matter. Everybody just is doing well. And it's because the teachers took the time to teach us how to learn.
Yeah, because unfortunately, the relationship with different people become finite after a while, especially our teachers are older than us. And the tragedy is that they pass on ultimately. But if they left a certain process that we can utilize to expand upon, even in terms of our learning process, then we can make that a continuous thing.
Yeah, for sure. One question I also had too, you mentioned the composition, and also Terrence Blanchard and all he's done, right? Do you have any aspirations for writing for film?
That's a huge one for me. It's almost like you read my mind. I would love to write for film. I mean, that's why I'm taking these lessons. That's why I'm trying to become more familiar with the orchestra and what those instruments can do. Because then when the time comes, I hope to be minimally prepared, because you never know what you're going to be asked to do. And as much as you think you may know, when you're being asked to do something that is different from what you normally do, then it's humbling because you realize, okay, I didn't know that. But if you have that what and how to learn, then you can figure out how to get that information to be able to make as they would say, make the gig for what is being asked of you to do.
Yeah, and just the fact that you are still studying with somebody, for composition. And I'm being so sincere. Listening to this album, it certain songs brought me to a certain place, and that's what films do. That's what the background music and even the main themes for films do. They evoke an emotion, but it's not just the emotion. When you read a really good book, you get this picture in your mind of what's going on, and that's what I got. That's what
Thank
I
you.
got from this. So that's why I asked that question, because as soon as you mentioned composition, I'm like, okay, now I see it.
You take a piece like the second track, I think it's called Down the Alley. And it was written for all of the composers of Tin Pan Alley during that time. And my goal was to write something that sounded like music that might be on Broadway. So hopefully that is what people will hear when they hear that. Madam C.J. Walker, there was a certain strut that I wanted to provoke in her, in the sound of that music, or the Red Caps. I wanted that to be about trains. Miss Tyson, that was about elegance because Cecily Tyson represented elegance.
Yeah.
We talked about, and then at the end, I wrote two pieces, which is part of the New Orleans function. Those pieces, Notes for the Fallen, and Until We Meet Again. Notes for the Fallen is really a slow dirge because in the New Orleans tradition, we say we mourn a person to their gravesite, we mourn them because they're no longer with us on this planet. But Until We Meet Again is an up-tempo party kind of tune in New Orleans tradition because we celebrate the fact that they've gone on to a better place. So hopefully all of those kind of emotions can be really, invoked in terms of the listening of that particular piece.
You know what's interesting? This harkens back to what you said before with what Rufus Reid said. You know, you don't want to have music. All right, yeah, some people have music on in the background, but if you really want to get deep into the music listening is an event.
Mhm.
And it just occurred to me too, like, when you all listen to this CD, the Woodlawn Suite over here, and again, the links will be in the show notes, make the listening an event. And you could read, there's that I'm old school. I like to get CDs. Yeah, do I have a lot of MP3s? I do, but I miss this. You got great liner notes here, and he talks about Madam C.J. Walker, and Down the Alley. And he talks about the stories here. Read the story, listen to the music, close your eyes, and try to envision what the background may be, try to picture that person's life. I've played a lot of solo sax gigs for funerals and lots of different situations. Some were celebrations of life, which was interesting to me because in New York it wasn't like that. But anyway, in Los Angeles it is. Depends on the family. But it just was so interesting to me to see like some of the choices of music that they chose, and how it reflected that person's life and how they wanted to live. It was so interesting.
Music can be powerful. We have to always remember it's a powerful tool, and what makes it more powerful is how we use it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a great way to end this. Victor, I can't thank you enough. You've been so busy, and I'm glad we were able to find a time to meet and to just tap your brain, pick your brain. This was such an inspiring episode, and like when we're done, I'm going to practice because I really feel like I want to get back to practicing and stuff like that. But I can't thank you enough for your time. This was so great, and I want to thank you for all you've done for jazz.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I'm glad we had a chance to speak. I hope I left some information out there for our listeners, and I encourage you to keep watching this show. I mean, it's fantastic. It's the best way to learn. Listen to what people are saying and check it out. You're not obligated to do anything a person tells you, but you're only obligated to listen to it to make a decision if it's going to be what you're going to do.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.